start with you if I can, Terry. Not just Michael Brennan making this argument about debt. Treasury Secretary Stephen Kennedy, he was out there saying we have to keep an eye on debt. You reckon there's any fiscal conservatives left in the Liberal Party? And if there are they listening?
First, can I compliment you, Peter, on nailing one of the great Australian hypocritical twerps earlier in the show. That was fantastic. But, I mean, what Brennan and others are saying is just the basic reality, but unfortunately I fear their voices are voices in the wilderness, that the reality is that we've embraced deficits, we've embraced debt, both at the federal budget level, the state budget level, and indeed at the personal level. And we have a structure now which makes fiscal restraint a pipe dream, I think, in the immediate future. But the basic reality is still, as you articulate, and as Brennan articulated, we need to embrace fiscal restraint. We need to embrace productivity. We need to embrace open borders and international trading environments. So all of these things are statements of bleeding obvious, but unfortunately they're not that obvious, I think, to our political leadership or the elites at this stage.
I want to move to your column today in The Australian, if I can, Judith. You say it's time to end the tidal wave of international students coming into Australian universities. It's just one statistic I thought really struck out, and I want to share it with viewers at home. You point out that between 2010 and 2019, the number of international students enrolled in higher ed in Australia increased from nearly 200,000 to a whopping 440,000. That's an 80% hike. Tell us why you want change here.
Well, Peter, of course, the figures were talking to us without actually even having to describe it much longer. That's an enormous increase. And viewers might be also interested in the fact that, yes, there were 440,000 higher education students, but there were really quite a large number of additional ones, which made about 700,000 students. There are really quite a lot of school students, international school students, and then there's the vocational education, language colleges and the like. So it really is a very big percentage, particularly of the youth population. So, look, one of the points I'm making is that we have seen, I think, a decline in the standards of higher education. And I think the offering to local students, and there was a tremendous number of comments on my piece, Peter, actually, because people, I think, experience, know that the local students are basically being dudded in various ways because of the large number. It's the international students with very poor language skills. That's one of the really big issues.
Yeah, and look, anecdotally, I don't have the statistics on this, but people I know at university across a number of age cohorts are saying too, there's a lot more emphasis on group projects. So that people with good English language skills help drag through the foreign students, because unless they get their doctorate or degree or qualification, there's no great payoff for the university. They need them to go back home and market that Australia's a good place to study, and that lifts the numbers that they can bring in more, and that's partly why we have this exponential growth. I want to move to the issue of tax, if I can. Back in the headlines, personal income tax is set to account for 52 cents in every dollar raised in Australia by the Commonwealth next year. So not corporates. You and I are going to pay the lion's share of the tax revenue, which means there's a lot of scrutiny now on the income amounts, tax amounts paid by our wealthiest Australians. According to James Kirby at The Australian, the wealthiest Australians are uniquely positioned to take advantage of effective tax shelters to minimise their bills. Not so everybody else. Terry, we're not all in this together, are we?
No, Peter. I mean, this is a trend that has been building over not only years but decades. The reality is that it's sort of a messy mix at the top, because clearly higher income earners pay a much bigger proportion of their incomes and a much bigger proportion of the overall tax bill in the community. But at the same time, some of them are able to really exploit the opportunities to minimise tax. So it's a combination of a lot of people at the top end are paying more tax than their fair share, so to speak, whereas others are paying less than their fair share. Wage and salary income earners in the middle are the ones that really have no option but to pay very high rates of tax. And it goes back to the basic reality, and I've got to compliment Treasurer Josh Frydenberg for trying to at least get that basic rate down, which covers most of people up to incomes up to a couple of $100,000 at 30 cents in the dollar. So unfortunately, the reality, given what we're talking about, those huge budget deficits, is that we're not going to see any serious tax cuts anytime soon. And the reality of this very unbalanced tax system is going to continue.
Let's go to coal exports. Stories around today that coal exports could halve over the next decade in a worst case scenario on the back of modelling released from one of the country's biggest freight rail operators. This is Aurizon, and they've warned that thermal and metallurgical coal exports could be in danger if there's a great change in climate policies, if we're not exporting as much into Asia. A whole range of issues there, Judith. Jobs are at the forefront, of course, but I keep thinking about this federal budget. If we're not getting the export revenues into the bottom line of the budget, and we look at the issues there with the income tax, it's ordinary Australians paying it, not big companies. How on earth are we going to turn this budget around?
Well, I think the death of coal has been, actually announced, not even just forecast, quite a lot of times. And it's interesting if you look at the thermal coal prices. So we're not talking about the coking coal ones for steel, the thermal ones for electricity. They're running at historical highs at the moment. So this was a worst case scenario. I mean, if you look at what's happened and continuing to happen with the construction of coal-fired power stations through Asia, not just in China, but in Vietnam and India and the like, I think there is actually a plausible case to think that Australia, which don't forget we have very high quality coal, will continue not along the worst case scenario, but actually quite a good case scenario. And that, of course, drives the green activists, the climate change emergency specialists, to complete distraction.
Hey, Terry, just a quick one. A lot of businesses very unhappy with the pathway out of this lockdown, the continuing restrictions, particularly hospitality. Any hope for them, do you think?
Let's revisit this on Monday, Peter, because I think quite clearly what the government has done, for good or for bad, is to basically extend the lockdown through the long weekend. A little partial lockdown, I'd call it a Clayton's end of the lockdown so far. But I would hope that come Monday, we would finally get out of this lockdown. And it must be the last lockdown anywhere in Australia, and certainly in our lockdown state, which we're all in, Victoria.
Well, good luck with that. We should run a book because I don't think it will be the last. Terry McCrann, Judith Sloan, thank you for your time.